So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and once again we are going to be on one of the more iconic maps that Middle-earth can provide, because we are of course on Helm's Deep, and it is going to be a classic alliance that defends Helm's Deep today, because it's going to be Rohan, played by Sebastian, and it's going to be Lothlorien, played by Y2K86, who I believe is responsible for sending me this battle replay. Indeed he is. This is going to be quite interesting. It is the version of Helm's Deep as well that is technically the older one, I believe, where you do get a bug occasionally where the attackers do end up actually no, it's the defenders actually who have ended up losing a couple of their units, but at least on this occasion it does appear to only be a very small handful of Eastmark spearmen, so quite literally the weakest melee combatant that Rohan have. If that had been something like Guard or Helm's Hammers, I'm sure they would have been far more perturbed by that, but as it is, it isn't. And yeah, Helm's Deep. You don't need me to explain why Helm's is bleh, excuse me. I'll try that sentence again, shall I? You don't need me to explain what Helm's Deep is all about. It's a very simple settlement in many ways. The main thing that you have to be on the lookout for as the defenders is to not allow the attackers to take this wall here specifically. We've seen several times in the past how this can really be the undoing of the defenders, because the attackers can get skirmishes, especially if it's something like crossbows or decently high damage javelins up here, throw them down or shoot them down into the defensive positions as the fighting progresses to within the keep's walls. It's something the defenders can't really recover from, especially in a situation where they're outnumbered by a single army. This is a 2v3, which is pretty much the ideal number of armies for a battle on Helm's Deep. Something like a 5v3 is far too much really for a battle like this, and this is still a very long battle as well at 54,000 frames. But let's go through some of the attacking armies. Once again we have Horde Malleus, who has been making several appearances on the channel as of late, which is good to see. He is of course going to be playing as Isengard. Naturally they are going to be making up some of the attackers today. The Lert's Hunting Pack are a good choice of unit as well, because if you can manage to use their body piercing projectiles to good effect within those walls, it's going to be really good for you, because you're going to be able to rip through the enemy units nicely with those body piercing projectiles. However, it is worth saying that it's going to be very difficult to do that within the walls of Helm's Deep. Like I said, if you can somehow manage to take the inner walls and then shoot down into the defenders, that's a different story. Then maybe you can really start to ratchet up those kills. But other than that, it's going to be quite difficult. They're also going to be one of the first things that the defending skirmishers, especially those really high damage elven archers, are going to be looking to try and shoot down. But even if you can't use them as archers, they are actually fairly decent melee combatants as far as rangers go. So that is something else worth bearing in mind for Isengard. Urakai Raiders, naturally the attacks are not going to be able to bring nothing but their elite units. They're going to have some foot sloggers somewhere, and yeah, Urakai Raiders will do that. They're very much akin to something like the Angmar Marauders, for example, or the Rhudaur Swordsmen from the Wildmen, where they're not all that impressive individually as combatants, but there are a lot of them, and you can certainly push them forward and they can fight and die for the cause. Leather armour though, so even the Rohirrim archers, who are slightly less impressive than the elven ones, will be able to do decent damage to them. More on Rohan later though. They're not really about their archers so much as they are about their throwing projectiles. The Nazghai are in here, a really good armour piercing General's Bodyguard unit. Neither of the two defending factions are overly reliant on their armour though. Rohan, they're a little bit more about their damage. They will suffer a little bit from their lower armour in some respects, because their melee defense doesn't really make up for it in the same way that Lothlorien have got really high melee defense. Lorien's armour in general actually is going to be heavier, as well as their melee defense being better. And let's not also forget the fact that they wield axes for that high damage as well. All in all, this does add up to meaning that this armour piercing the Nazghai have is not the be-all and end-all as it would be against a faction like Gondor, for example, or Dol Amroth or Arthedain, any of the Western Kingdoms really, other than Rohan. Take your pick. But they're still going to be able to do a lot of damage, just with their raw base damage, and the fact that they themselves are a very resilient unit as well, with that Isengard plate armour on. We've got some Trolls to White Hand pushing up the siege tower. The Trolls are going to be, again, all about timing, when you commit them. If they get into the right kinds of targets, like some of the squishier units of Rohan Javelin and Axe Throwers, that's where they can be at their most effective. But they need to be really careful, because against the Elven Swordsmen and against the Rohirric Heavy Axeman, they could be in real trouble. So again, they're going to need to be careful. There's not a lot of room to manoeuvre inside Helm's Deep, so avoiding them is actually going to be quite difficult. The Urakai Infantry are of course a higher tier version of the Urakai Raiders in front of them, wearing that classic Isengard armour. It's going to serve them well in this sort of situation, because the attackers, they're not going to be able to avoid taking a lot of punishment from various sources, both at range and in melee. So let's see how they get on. But the Urakai Infantry, very solid, and also quite capable of dealing damage as well for the kind of unit that they are. Another unit of armor-piercing shock infantry, the Isengard, going for the slightly tankier version. Considering the amount of punishment they're likely to take in choke point fighting, it's not too surprising to see the Isengard opted for over something like the Urakai Reavers. Even so, the same issue applies to them as applies to the Nazkai. The armor piercing may not be as effective as it would otherwise be, but it's still useful to have. Yeah, still going to need a bit of that damage to push on through. The Urakai Berserkers are here. I was wondering if they would be naturally almost a must-bring on Helm's Deep. It should probably be written into the rules. 3 hit points means that they can keep themselves alive for a decent amount of time, regardless of what damage is coming at them, but as soon as those 3 hit points are gone, they don't have armor really. Their melee defense is really, really poor. If you compare them to the Nazkai in front of them, the Nazkai have got a little bit of extra melee defense, they've got that armor, they're able to keep themselves alive through other means than just hit points, which the Berserkers cannot do. Other than that though, they're built for very much the same sort of thing, doing a lot of damage very, very quickly with that armor-piercing edge that they possess. And finally, we've also seen very recently Isengard use their Urakai pikemen to brutal effect on Bersergath. The pike and shot kind of strategy that they employed there served them very, very well. It's going to be more difficult to use the shot aspects of that here on Helm's Deep, but the pikes themselves could be really, really effective here, because while Lothlorien do have a pike unit of their own, it's very high tier, they're not going to be able to blanket the field with them by any means. Rohan, of course, don't have a phalanx unit at all. So if, come the late game, once again, if the defenders are a little bit too gung-ho with their ammunition, they could leave themselves at the mercy of the long, pointy sticks that the Urakai pikemen come equipped with. So, that's going to be Isengard. Moving into the middle, the army that's going to be taking point is going to be Rhudaur, the wild men, joining in with Isengard on this occasion. So another aspect of Northman blood being deployed here, although a little bit of middlemen in with the Rhudaur army as well, and technically Dunedain. Rhudaur swordsmen, like I said, going to be very similar to the Urakai raiders that they march alongside today. Really in every aspect, to be honest. They're very numerous. Individually they're not all that impressive, but neither are they completely to be disregarded. They can actually look after themselves somewhat in melee. I really like the look of the Rhudaur army as well, the sort of the coat of plates kind of thing they have going on that's a little bit ramshackle, a little bit patched together in the brown colour schemes. Dunman Spearmen, very much a fodder class unit. Interesting to see no Dunlanders in the Isengard army. So the Dunman Spearmen are not going to be up to much in melee, certainly. Most of what Rohan and certainly what Lothlorien have are going to be able to kill them with impunity, but they are going to be here to make up the numbers. You don't really want to be using valuable ammunition on a unit like this. Rhudaur clansmen, you certainly don't want to be using ammunition against the Rhudaur clansmen because they actually have a really nice shield value. They don't have the armour upgrade on this occasion, which sort of doubles down on that defensive aspect that they have. But even this unit, pretty decently damaging for a unit of spears, but that's kind of what you expect from Rhudaur, going in for that little bit of extra damage at the cost of their own survivability with generally lower armour values. Dunman Spearmen are also here once again. Rhudaur Marksmen, lots of ammunition. They're just going to be that slow burn skirmisher that's going to be trying to do damage over the long haul for this battle. But it is going to be difficult for them. Helm's Deep, as we've said, unless you can take an advantageous bit of terrain as the attackers, which we have seen, using skirmishers is going to be difficult because it's not exactly in your favour. Helm's Deep sitting on raised terrain, difficult to get those good angles. We'll have to wait and see. The rest of the Rhudaur army almost certainly hidden. I would certainly say that Trollshaw Axe Throwers are going to be included, Ranodyne Rangers, and other such units. In fact, there are a few back here, way back here. One unit of Dunman Pikemen in the trees, and the General's Bodyguard. Yeah, we can see the tridents from this far away, going to be the Witch Realm Enslavers. Very similar story here as with the Nazkai. I think the Nazkai are slightly the superior unit. But yeah, armour piercing, still very damaging, but perhaps not as effective as it would otherwise be. And then we have Pager, who is playing as a second Isengard army. Once again, same thing applies with these Urakai pikemen over here. Half-Orc Spearguard is an interesting choice, much more of a defensive unit. Another unit that you can use as makeshift line infantry when you compare them to the Urakai Raiders and the Urakai Infantry. The Urakai Infantry are obviously better all around, they have better stats, they're going to be able to do damage to infantry better in melee. But if you do want a front line which is just going to stand and fight and live for as long as possible instead of doing damage, then you may be better going for the Spearguard than you would be going for the Raiders, to be honest with you, because their armour is going to be better, spears are going to be better at those more defensive aspects of combat. So it is interesting to see the Spearguard opted for here. Definitely not the wrong choice by default. We'll see if it pays off. Urakai Crossbowmen, if they can get into good positions on those walls, like I said, could be really devastating. It's worth bringing at least one unit of crossbows in this kind of situation regardless, because if you can make them work for you, yeah, it's going to be really difficult for the defenders to come back from that sort of damage. Several units of Urakai Infantry pushing up the siege towers. We've got some more half-orc Baneguard. He has also opted for a couple of units of Dunlending veterans, another unit that you can use as line infantry as Isengard. They are, in effect, the same sort of thing as the Urakai Raiders, only they are a little bit more damaging with those axes. I don't know in this situation if that's going to be too worthwhile. They might be able to do more damage to Rohirric units as a result. They also have a slight anti-cavalry bonus, which is another potential reason to bring them if you're expecting a sally out, but that's bold on Helm's Deep. You're much more likely to see that on Edoras because of the room that you're afforded. The Nazkai and Berserkers are here in Pedro's army as well, and he's also got the Fire of Orthanc, so I'll be interested to see if we are going to see a hole blown in the walls of Helm's Deep, just as we did in the movies. And of course they're manned by Berserkers as well. Very thematic. Now then, onwards to the defenders. Obviously Y2K, who sent me this battle replay playing as Lothlorien, so big thank you to him. He's got some Galathrin Blade Masters with the armour upgrade, so actually, no, not with the armour upgrade, this is the basic version. I keep forgetting because you don't often see this. I actually think I prefer the unupgraded version. It gives them more of that Lightfoot look that they are kind of intended to have. Heavy swordsmen are going to be one way in which Lothlorien can be really punishing against Isengard, but especially against Rhudaur, who with that lower armour value average overall, it's going to be tough for them to withstand the kind of damage that the elves can chuck out in melee with this kind of unit. The flip side to that, of course, is that they have to cut their way through a lot of units. The more heavily armoured elements of the Isengard army are also going to be a little bit tougher to bring down with a unit like this, and obviously they are going to be a little bit more susceptible to skirmish fire if the attackers can get into the right positions, and of course if they can avoid getting absolutely dumpstered by elven archers at range. Lorinand archers are going to be one such example. They don't have anything special about them like the rest really of the Lothlorien archer lineup, but they are just damned good heavy archers, and of course when they're out of ammunition they can also pull out their two-handed sword and also start chipping in melee. Another way in which the elves can really make their army work for them. Spears of the Woods are going for some of their more entry-level units, which I think going for numbers to a certain extent is going to be a good thing here for Lothlorien. It'll allow them more infantry units to hold on to more parts of the battlefield. Spears of the Wood, yes, they have light armour, certainly, but in terms of dealing with things in melee, their damage, their melee defense, that sort of thing, they're definitely going to punch above their weight in terms of spears. A good unit for holding lines, not so much holding the walls I would suggest, but we'll have to wait and see. Marchwands of the Wood are going to be capable of dealing damage as well as using their poison arrows. Breaking the enemy en masse is a pretty good tactic to use as long as you have the ability to break them quickly. Artillery can often help with that, and then flaming or poison arrows can help push the enemy over the edge. Keren Amroth Staff Masters have got huge melee defense and with low damage, but that damage is armor piercing. We have some Eastmark Spearmen down there as well, going to be offering their javelin support to the elves that are down here. Mostly it is going to be elves that are defending the lower section. Blades of the Wood, obviously very similar to the Spears of the Wood, only they're going to be a little bit more at home, tackling enemies on the walls in close quarters with the extra damage they can do to infantry. Some more Eastmark Spearmen, Kindred of Caliborn and Watchers of the Goldenwood down here, the Split Shot and Silverthorn arrows respectively. Another really good tools in the Lothlorien arsenal, as well as both of them being obviously exceptional in melee as well. Helmingas are going to be up here on the walls offering what support they can. They can also chip in melee, decently tanky for what Rohan have to offer as well. Westmark Infantry, we've seen them be maybe a little bit underwhelming in the last fight we saw Rohan take part in, at least in terms of kills. They'll be hoping to do better this time, and indeed they should. Certainly against Rhudaur and the lower tier units from Isengard, the Westmark Infantry should be fairly dominant. But I think the armour of the Urakai Infantry will mean they would fancy their chances in a one-on-one against these Rohirrim units. Shield Mains of Rohan, hand-thrown projectiles are one thing that Rohan really have to leverage in a fight like this. We saw their obvious shortcomings in the most recent siege of Bersergath. The Shield Mains on that occasion really wasted their ammo on targets that were far beneath them. That can't be the case here if the defenders want to go on to win this fight. They're going to need to pick their targets well. Considering the more support-based nature of what looks like the Rhudaur army might be, that's going to be an interesting one. We'll have to wait and see. Lorinand archers up here on the wall, Westmark Spearmen. Like we said, Westmark Infantry are obviously going to be better at killing things in close quarters, but the Spearmen are going to be very good defensively, both of them trying to defend the walls already, trying to make sure there's no way in for them. A few dead elves and Westmarks down here on the floor again, that'll be unfortunate for them. More numbers-based units in the Eastmark Axemen, going to try and counteract any mass pushing, I would suppose, with all of these units. Kind of similar, I suppose, to the Dunlending veterans in terms of how they're set up. A sort of light to medium tier line infantry unit that wields an axe. Several units of Riddermark Spearmen, one tier below the Westmark Spearmen that we've already seen. They're going to be forming the front line with plenty of numbers here, but with only Eastmark Spears to back them up, they're going to need something a little bit more damaging. Fortunately for them, the Elves are close by with some Rohan Axemen and the mighty Karas Galadon's Guardians. Keren Amroth Rangers, Rohan of course do not have access to Rangers of their own, so Keren Amroth Rangers could be absolutely vital in trying to secure victory for the defenders today. And then finally back here in the TC, we've got some Riddermark Axemen, we've got some Riddermark Archers, and we've also got some Westmark Infantry back here as well. To be honest, it's interesting to see this Rohan army. It's more low tier than perhaps you would expect, but maybe that's consequently what you would expect at the same time, because if they're going for a more lore-friendly approach to this battle, with Rhudaur maybe trying to represent the Dunlanders, maybe the Rohirrim are meant to be slightly lower tier, slightly more cobbled together, whereas the elves that are fighting alongside them are a little bit more well equipped and ready for the situation. But it does actually mean that the defenders have got a fairly large army, all things considered. Even the elves have gone slightly more numbers heavy, so the attackers are not going to be able to simply overwhelm the enemy and expect that to work. They're going to have to be a little bit more savvy with things, and that may involve using Rhudaur and Isengard support tools like their javelins and their crossbows to good effect. We'll see if the defenders allow them to do that. Now, I will make a little bit of a cut, because I don't know if Rhudaur are going to wait for the two Isengard armies to arrive, which I'd imagine they will. They probably should. No artillery for the defenders, but again, Rhudaur with a slightly offbeat army as well. It's going to be interesting, this. Not the armies that you would typically see, I would suggest. So yeah, I'm going to make a little cut, and we'll rejoin when Helm's Deep is being attacked. So we rejoin, rather surprisingly perhaps, with Rhudaur the ones taking the most initiative with pushing the ram up to the gates, and they're going to be the ones battering it down, and also the first to join their siege towers to the lower wall of Helm's Deep. Interesting, because Rhudaur will perhaps make the most tempting target for all of the missiles that the defenders will have at their disposal, in particular the archers from Lothlorien, with Isengard having the better ammunition of course, but by that same token, use of ammunition does need to be rationed quite carefully for the defenders, because this is how they can potentially go on to win this fight, or perhaps not. We shall have to wait and see. But those missiles are going to be very important, both for the elves and for the Rohirrim. We've seen recently, as the gates fall, it does look as though Rhudaur are actually going to pull back from this initial wave. They're simply going to set their siege equipment up, which is kind of frustrating. I may have to make another little cut very soon after the initial one, but just before that I'll finish my train of thought, in that we've seen Rohan recently with a unit, especially this one here, the Shield Maidens of Rohan, waste ammunition too readily, and that's so detrimental to your cause with Rohan. You're going to need to use that ammunition as well as you can on stuff like Urakai Pikemen perhaps, or the high tier units that both Rhudaur and Isengard can bring to the table. We'll make another little cut here, and we'll rejoin when the battle is actually getting underway rather than just the ground being prepared. So I suppose we shall rejoin here, because while it's kind of difficult to see when the Fire of Orthanc will actually detonate based on its animations alone, this is going to be the attackers' ploy, I suppose. Again, playing into the fact that this is meant to be more of a recreation, I suppose, of the battle that actually did take place at Helm's Deep. So the black powder will be here. Interestingly enough though, the blast radius is such that the defenders know of the blast radius clearly, because they pulled back quite a long way. It does leave this area quite undefended though, so if the attackers want to rush in here right now, as soon as this this wall does crumble, you can see that they actually got knocked down all the way over here. The Rhudaur swordsmen also over here. The entirety of the crew actually ending up being slain, which is kind of unfortunate really, because they can be quite useful as a melee combatant. It's very rare that you'll see a large portion of the unit actually survive, but a good opportunity now perhaps for them to rush in and actually claim this entire side of the lower section, and it will take away a large amount of the choke point fighting that the defenders can do. The defenders well on top of this. They do seem to be quicker on the draw than the attackers, certainly with how the attackers have really quite taken their time. In the off time as well, where I've been cut, they've been sort of going a little bit back and forth with their siege towers and some of their units, not really making up their mind on what they want to do, whereas the defenders seem a little bit more decisive with how they're choosing to approach things. So very, very quickly, the elves, backed up by some Rohirrim javelins, are going to move into position to plug the potential gap that has appeared in their defences, and almost immediately as well, the two siege towers that were set up have also now been recovered by the Galatharan Blade Masters that were up here previously. Unupgraded though they may be, they will be just the sort of thing which the forces of Rhudaur are not going to enjoy facing off against all that much. Dunlanders joining in with the men of Rhudaur, as well as some slightly tankier but less damaging half-orc spear guard. Are they going to move in numbers here? Well, Isengard are. So Isengard are in fact going to lead the way. The Dunlanders first in. They're really going to struggle against the kind of melee defense that Lothlorien are going to bring to the table, though. Karen Amril Staffmasters are not the most damaging unit, it must be said, and all on their lonesome like this, they could end up being overwhelmed by a concentrated assault such as this. Time will tell. I mean, a single unit of Blades of the Wood will be just the sort of thing to turn that around. Eastmark Spearmen and Marchborns of the Wood firing in, so some arrows and javelins, both of which are going to be dealing healthy amounts of damage to the units that are here, and with that support the Staffmasters should be just fine, and the attackers are going to need to commit a little bit more if they are to be successful here. Those poison arrows will also hasten any potential breaking from the Isengard and Rhudaur forces as they push their way through this gap in the wall. Defeat seems almost certain for the defenders, which is perhaps a little harsh. What is going on over here? You can see Rhudaur clansmen are just poking their heads inside over here. The Dunman Spearmen also are a couple of dead Urakai which are moved forwards. Not entirely sure what the Dunman Spearmen are hoping to accomplish here. Some good discipline, I suppose, by the Rohirrim to not simply collapse in on this single unit of spears immediately. They're going to hold their formation. There's no real need for them to move at the moment, after all. They're not being pressured in any way by ranged units. Might be a little bit different if this was a unit of javelins or axe throwers that Rhudaur had moved forward, but that would also have been a pretty terrible risk on their part to commit such a unit in here when you have no guarantee if they're actually going to get any damage done. Riddermark Spearmen, don't see an awful lot of the mid-tier units of Rohan. Riddermark Spearmen occupy a fairly weird position in the Rohirrim roster. Most times if you want to bring a unit of spears like this, you'll bring the Westmarks because they are better. But the Riddermark Spears, for their price I suppose, they'll be able to hold the line decently enough, but this again feeds into the fact that the defenders are going to need to use their ranged units very effectively. More half-orcs are on the way forward now, so still nothing overtly dangerous being sent in, but so far only the most basic stuff. Eastmark Axemen should do fairly well actually against stuff like the Dunman units. Less so against the more impressive units that are on the field. The siege towers still not being utilised so far. It is still just this one choke point that the attackers are pushing their way through. Blades of the Wood being committed now as well, seeing the necessity to commit something a little bit more damaging now that even more Dunlanders and also the first Urakai that we've seen in combat, albeit only the raiders, have moved in. Putting pressure here. The Kindred of Celeborn were actually in melee, which is kind of interesting as they were passing by this area, but they really have nothing to fear from the odd Urakai raider that's managed to push their way through. Eastmark Spearmen, not the most devastating of javelins to be sure, but in this sort of position they can still be a very efficient unit. Meanwhile, this over here exposing one of Lothlorien's potential weaknesses, having to take arrow fire from their lighter units is not a good thing for them. You can see they've already taken a lot of damage. They've probably given out quite a lot of damage as well, but this is bad news for them if they still have a bit of ammunition. The Rhudaur marksmen in behind are very unlikely to run out of ammunition anytime soon. That entire unit will be dead before they do, so it's something for Lothlorien to have to consider here. Meanwhile, up here on the walls, you can see some shieldmanes of Rohan, some Helmingas are also over here who have turned around and are now shooting into that large blob, which, I mean, in all honesty, that is a large break. I mean, this was a fairly substantial committal of resources, this. I mean, Pedro has committed forward a unit of Urakai Infantry, which is a strong unit. There's also pikes being sent in here. So, not an insignificant amount of units here which are being ultimately slaughtered by the Rohirrim. Helmingas with those fire arrows causing them to break. The infantry, while basic, served its function and held on just fine. There's also a few poison arrows coming in here. They need to be a little bit careful that any friendly fire doesn't do too much damage to the Rohirrim's efforts. They too are not completely immune to breaking as we have seen in the past, but so far in the morale stakes it's been all one-way traffic over here. Shieldmanes of Rohan, again, I really wouldn't be using their ammunition at this point in the battle. They're going to do damage, but there's no need to be using them at this point. You're so dominant in that fight that you don't need to pour even more hurt on them, and even most of those units are broken and fighting to the death. So definitely want to conserve a bit more of the ammunition for some of the scarier units that lurk in the distance. Urakai Berserkers would be one such thing. Galatharan Blade Masters still wait. More units being committed in. You can see that the Kindred of Celeborn in a pretty advantageous position themselves. Eastmark Spearmen now being committed to melee after the Staff Masters have been barged out of the way. Once again, these basic Rohirrim units really just being used as a means to an end to hold the line while the ranged units do their thing. Very depleted unit of Marchwarns at this point, but the real damage dealers for the time being are going to be the upgraded Kindred of Celeborn. And while they may not be quite as devastating as Rangers are, those split shots are still going to get plenty of hits, plenty of base damage on them as well. They're taking a bit of return fire, and it's from crossbows as well, so they will actually start taking losses pretty quickly. That is a potential problem for them. They may want to move as a result of that even. Another unit of archers here, the Rhudaur archers, could also start pouring damage into the attacking position. I mean, the attackers are doing a pretty good job at picking away at the ranged units that the defenders have in place, but one thing that I would criticise them for here, they're only pushing through the hole in the wall that they've made. They should also, even if it's just a token effort, be pushing some units up onto the wall so they're pressurising multiple points, in my opinion. If you're only attacking through one choke point, it means that the defenders can not only concentrate their melee forces to make it harder for you to push through, but they can also concentrate their ranged units, which, considering the amount of damage that Lothlorien can do with their archers and Rohan can do with their throwing projectiles, is a potentially really bad thing for the attackers. It hasn't been too decisive yet, but it could be so if things continue in this vein. Now, the attackers up here have got a little bit more of an excuse for that, in that they can't really go anywhere else other than through the gate. So it is a little bit more understandable, but if they are a little bit more aggressive, they could potentially push through and then get up onto the walls that way, but Rohan are already ready for that, with 2 whole units of Westmark Spearmen waiting for them if they are able to do that, so it may just be they need to play the long game up here, the attackers. Still some Rhudaur clansmen who are still alive, those big shields really helping them out, given the Rohirrim archers doing a lot of damage to them. Some slightly more damaging Isengard pushing onto the front line now as well. They should do pretty well against the Rhudaur Spearmen in a pure melee fight, but still, all of these basic Rohan units doing pretty well for themselves, and if needs be, these units of Helmingast can always be committed to the cause. Watchers of the Goldenwood firing in now as well, with the ranged units now a little bit further away, perhaps in a slightly less advantageous position. I mean, there's still a lot of damage being done here in all fairness. The Loran Axemen being joined in, so Lothlorien not too eager to give up this defensive position just yet, and indeed why not? As long as the attackers do not attack along the walls, you can continue to push units forward without fear of them being attacked from the side or the rear as a result of the walls being claimed via the siege towers. Still a unit of Galatharan Blade Masters up here, 59 of them that could be pushed down at any moment. Eastmark Spearmen charging in, certainly not the most devastating melee unit, but attacking from the rear like this could cause a rout. The Half-Orc Spear Guard are already doing so. The Rhudaur Swordsmen could follow them, they're already shaken. There go the Dunlanders, another big rout, so far so good for the defenders. They've sent some rather large assaults from the attackers packing already, and the attackers need to rethink what they're doing here. For Helm's Deep, claiming this lower section first is always key, because pushing through the gate with everything you have is obviously going to be costly, especially given the damage that can be done by stuff like the Shield Maidens. However, what's going on there? Those are clear projectiles, which means, yes indeed, it's the Lurtz Hunting Pack shooting into the Rhudaur archers. If I were the defenders, I'd actually be quite happy about that. Yes, it's a unit of archers that you could be doing damage with, but the Lurtz Hunting Pack is such a potentially problematic unit for you to have to deal with in the late game. Loran archers taking a bit of damage, Marchwarns of the Wood are here. There are still Lorien reinforcements that can be committed. There's not too much in the way of Rohirric units down here any longer. Rhudaur marksmen being pushed forward, out of ammunition finally, but they've certainly done a good job so far. That's one thing I would give to the attackers' credit. They've used their archers and crossbows so far pretty well down here in the lower section of the fortress. These Blades of the Wood should carve through them in melee. Do they have any quality here to assist them? Snaga skirmishers trying to do a bit of damage. Urakai crossbowmen are firing over the walls. The trolls, I think, are moving in. If they're going to do this, they need to commit a little bit more, I think, as well. Single unit of trolls, while a problem for the defenders, is not something that is insurmountable when you consider the damage that some of Lothlorien's heavier units are capable of doing in melee. Trolls of the White Hand, though, they have got a large amount of field that they can now push their way into. They can get into the Rhudaur archers in melee and utterly devastate them. Loran Axemen are still here, but Loran warriors would be the thing that the trolls would be really worried about, and they are not anywhere to be found. Archers shooting at them point blank range, but they're not the most damaging archers at the best of times, and in melee they are substantially worse. Still, Kindred of Celeborn, having taken the damage from the crossbowman, continuing to try and claim some vengeance, firing into those Rhudaur swordsmen. Coming in from the side now, though, are the trolls. A bit of a problem, perhaps, with the defensive line this. Things could get a little bit ugly for them. Flaming shots being utilised. Forward comes some Urakai Infantry and Half-Orc Vanguard Mort Malleus. I like this a little bit more of a concerted effort rather than just singular units. Meanwhile, over here, this is probably not the best of signs for the attackers, as yet more of their number retreat back down the hill that leads up to the gates. Rohan still standing firm and still with plenty of their Eastmark Axemen and Rhudaur Spearmen alive. Yes, less than there were, but there's enough yet to put on another one of those defensive performances before they may have to start committing reinforcement. So still, if the attackers are to do something, it will have to be via this direction. Javelins and arrows of all descriptions now being committed by both sides. The Trolls of the White Hand pushing their way through. Lornand Axemen shaken as a result of the Trolls' presence, and all of these units pushing forward as well. The Vanguard, the Urakai Infantry, a good commitment as well because of their higher resilience against the pressure that Lothlorien is putting on them with their arrows. The armour and shields coming in very handy. The Trolls pushing forward, not really the target I would have picked. Both units of infantry, I mean, they're retreating, so they're going to be able to get a few kills as they turn their backs. The Trolls are bloody. Good use of the Trolls, actually, in the end. I don't think the defenders reacted all that quickly to their presence on the front line, so for once the attackers in this battle seem to have the drop on the defenders. More flaming arrows coming down here. At this point, I don't think you're going to rout them, so the flaming shot is more for aesthetic purposes only. You're still going to be doing damage as the Helmingas shower punishment down upon the Northmen and Urakai as they push through over here. Although Rhudaur, they count as Northmen? I think they do. Sort of a mix of Northman, Middleman, and a little bit of Dunedain in there. Dilute though it may be. Meanwhile, another push to the main gate. This time only a single unit of Eastmark Axemen are here to block the way. Could be a bit of a problem for Rohan. They're going to need some support from some of those Spearmen. More Axemen moving forward. Eastmark Axemen and Dunlending Veterans, kind of similar units. You might get the slight edge to the Dunlenders in that fight. Maybe. Not entirely sure, to be honest, but still. There's still plenty of fighting men of Rohan that are going to be blocking this assault through the main gate. And plenty of reinforcements to be forthcoming as well. So they're pulling back here. This in some ways is a victory for the attackers, of course. It means they've claimed the lower section of the fortress. They can start attacking from the side. The only potential problem they now have is that they cannot make use of a wide attack anymore. They haven't at this point in the battle anyway, but now they're going to be bottled up into 2 choke points. And it's going to get quite messy. It's going to get quite constricted in this fight now. These Riddermark archers have been caught ultimately. They need to get out of here if they are to be preserved. These Trolls of the White Hand are a problem. This is not the unit I would commit to this situation. Carascaladon's Guardians, very elite unit. They're pikes ultimately. I mean, the Trolls are very wounded, so it may not be quite the blunder that it could otherwise have been, but pikes are not what you want to be using against Trolls. Carascaladon's Guardians are too important of a unit to be thrown under the bus. But perhaps the injuries that the Trolls have already sustained make that a fight too much for them anyway. Half-Orc Vanguard celebrating the final victory down here in the lower section of the fortress. Get up through that door. Now then, making slow progress through here. The Dunlend Veterans break once again, but Urakai Pikemen are now arriving on the front line. This is where problems could start to arise for the defenders. These are the sorts of units that they definitely need to be using their missiles on. Because of course, Lothlorien only have 1 unit of pikes, so elite as they may be, they can only cover 1 angle. Rohan don't have any phalanx units of any description, so they're going to need to use their throwing projectiles on them to break up, especially the Urakai Pikemen in this situation. It's exactly the sort of unit and tool that Isengard had custom designed to deal with their most hated rival. got some Karen Admiral staff masses, some dregs from Isengard being sent up first. Not the most organised defensive line, it must be said, but it will suffice for this kind of rather clumsy assault. Helm and Gas, there's sort of spears of those. Rhudaur spearmen heading up onto the walls. Getting up here, Shield Maidens getting into a position. I do not believe there are any Medicel Guard, which was an interesting omission. Kind of an unorthodox pick from Rohan in general, going much more numbers heavy than maybe you would expect, considering their defenders, but it may end up really paying dividends for them, because so far the numbers focused defence of the front gate has actually worked out here for Sebastian Lenher. My big question would be, can that continue throughout the fight? Because you're never going to win a numbers war if you're the defenders in this situation against the forces of evil. Time will only tell. Lothlorien do have their own qualities as well, but there's still plenty of units out here. When you just take stock, yes, the attackers have taken losses already, but they've got plenty more they have to give. Plenty of interesting units as well. Urakai Pikemen, Ettenballs, Troll Hunters, exactly the sort of thing which could be a real issue. Rhudaur Swordsmen in numbers. Urakai Berserkers, still the Lurtz hunting pack, so the attackers still have a lot that can be committed, which is a real problem with them, have the Baneguard and Slavers. So, do the defenders have what it takes to effectively hold them at bay indefinitely now? If they start to lose ground within the settlement, things could get fairly ugly. Well, some Rhudaur Axemen moving forward. Basic Axemen though they may be, that sort of armor-piercing damage should help finish off the Trolls of the White Hand. Rhudaur Archers still waiting. I mean, they're pointing the wrong way here, the Shield Maidens. They're probably not going to be lobbing their axes that way. They're probably going to be going in this direction. Urakai Pikemen still slowly marching their way forward. The helmets of the Dunlanders trying to make their way through there as well. A few Dunman Pikemen as well, so plenty of sharp pointy sticks. They're being used to pretty good effect, and Rohan's struggling a little bit as time goes on, and slowly but surely taking losses. Yeah, I'm a little bit surprised to not see any ranged units try and attack them, although I guess maybe the angles aren't quite right just yet. Maybe we'll actually go up to ×2 speed. This feels like a sort of moment for that, to be honest. Urakai Infantry pushing forward. More and more of these heavier Isengard infantry units are becoming the heart and soul of the attackers' efforts at this point. And they are pretty much custom made for this sort of thing. High quality enough to actually do some damage and take some hits, but Isengard can field them in enough numbers to the point where it can be a sustained effort. Still a lot of half-up Baneguard back here, Berserkers waiting to be committed. Not a huge amount of quality for the attackers, like they've got a few units that are individually quite dangerous. This could be an issue as well for the attackers. Rangers are a crutch that people do like to rely upon, I do agree, but given the game is what it is at the moment, this is exactly the sort of thing which the defenders need to be taking full advantage of. The Karen Admiral's Rangers is probably the single best unit of Rangers when it comes to dealing damage in the game. Same level of damage as the other Elven Rangers, but they also have a two-handed blade in melee, which gives them that extra little bit of utility. Meanwhile, Rhudaur Spearmen are here. Coming down from the walls are the Westmark Spearmen, sensing the opportunity to shore things up with a little bit of extra quality. They're still not the most damaging unit, but they're certainly very good at holding a line, and at this point these Rhudaur Swordsmen have pushed their way in a little bit too far and will likely continue to take very, very heavy losses. There's still a lot of pikemen as well though, and as soon as they reorganise themselves against the spears, Rohan will be facing exactly the same issue that they have up to this point. There's ever more units coming forward though. Another unit of Rhudaur Swordsmen. They're trying to get their Ferodrum Javelins into position here. Rhudaur, very damaging unit of Javelins. The equivalent to what would have been the Medicel Guard for Rohan, a bodyguard unit of Javelins, which has also got its uses in melee. But it's going to be difficult for them. As soon as they start claiming territory within the settlement and their options open up a little bit more outside of 2 simple choke points, things could be a little bit different. They've managed to get up onto the walls here though. The berserkers in the vanguard have shown themselves to be a bit of a problem, but ultimately I think this could end up being a bit of a blessing in disguise for the defenders, because it means they've got pretty much the perfect target to shoot into with their high damage skirmishers. Berserkers are absolutely one of those units you want to be dealing with in this manner. The Half-Orc Baneguard have routed as well. The Berserkers will not rout, of course, they will fight to the bitter end. I think they were trying to go after the Shield Maidens, which is fair enough for the Berserkers. Acting as the fanatical first wave is after all what they are intended to do, but we could also start to see their lower defensive attributes start to showcase its ugly head as this battle goes on. Helmengas, having already shot their shot at range, now going to be used as makeshift infantry, as is the intention behind the unit. Very basic as a sword and shield infantry unit goes, but basic has served Rohan fairly well at this point. Some berserkers still down here at ground level, stronger than the Rohirric infantry they're fighting down here, but they're also hopelessly outnumbered, continuously getting bloodied. Those berserkers are getting dunked on by the Kindred of Caliborn and the Cairn Amroth Rangers. Caras Galadon's Guardians are moving forward, perhaps as a countermeasure to all of these pikes that have been a little bit of a problem for the defenders in trying to hold on to this gate. And that is a problem for the attackers, because as much as Isengard have very well known for their pikes, Caras Galadon's Guardians are on a completely different level to simple Urakai pikemen. Continuing to send clouds of blood into the atmosphere are the Kindred. But with these berserkers making it a little bit more difficult to organise a defence, in come the Blaze of the Wood. It's a good opportunity perhaps for them to make some gains on ground level, which I think is what Lord Malleus is trying to do with his Urakai, trying to push some pikemen onto the front line as well. I mean, Staff Masters and Helmengas are what makes up most of this front line. That isn't exactly terribly scary. Those Baneguard are of course still routed. Spears of the Wood helping to shore things up. I think these Westmark Spearmen are getting a little bit too far ahead of themselves. I think they need to remain in close proximity to their elven support. Lothlorien archers, what are they firing into? Firing more directly into the Urakai berserkers. There's still units managing to force their way up here, which of course they didn't force their way through, did they? They went up this way, they went along the walls. So they do have another, something that I even forgot about actually. I forgot that you could do that on Helm's Deep. Bit of a design flaw in the fortress really when you think about it, but yeah, if they can do that, like the attackers need to continue to do that, get units up onto the walls, make it much less comfortable for the defenders to try and utilise that position. Having said that, they are taking pretty horrendous casualties up here, the berserkers already having done so, the Rhudaur clansmen following, and they've got their Nazkai up here as well, so I mean, he's very committed to trying to make something happen up here, is Lord Malleus, but I don't necessarily think it's going to work. The Nazkai immediately, once they were up on the walls, came down here as well to try and support the berserkers down here, but the Nazkai are immediately going to attract all sorts of attention from the elven archers that still have ammunition. And when they're softened up enough, will the infantry be enough to finish them off? Probably without more support, but it's made the attack, well, it's made the situation on the battlefield a lot messier, which is exactly what the attackers will want in this kind of situation. Meanwhile, there's still a lot of Urakai out here, a lot of Urakai pikemen at that, and those Westmark spearmen finding themselves utterly outnumbered. Going to try and gain a little bit of momentum to push through the main gate now, perhaps. We shall have to wait and see. More units again, big committals at this point happening. I mean, quite a lot of those are actually routing. Snaga skirmishers in melee, not the scariest thing, but it looks intimidating when you've got that many units rolling forth. Looks like the Kindred of Caliborn just ran out of ammunition, but they've got plenty of good shots, so they can be happy with their day's work at range, and now they will join in melee, which of course, bad news for the attackers as well. A very strong unit in melee, tough to kill being a dual wielder, but damaged after their encounter with the crossbow, so maybe not quite the tour de force that they could well have been. Lothlorien archers pushing forward finishing off what remains of the attacking units up here on the walls, and good recovery here. This is a good opportunity now for the defenders to shut this avenue of attack. And once again, they've got some Westmark infantry up here, but very depleted. Shield mains of Rohan showing a lot more restraint. After those initial volleys earlier on, I was a little bit concerned, but much more restraint now. Choosing their time right with those volleys could be extremely important. Forward come the Watchers of the Golden Wood as well, so both the high tier Lothlorien units now getting involved. And things getting a little bit more thin on the ground for the attackers over here now. They can't afford for another one of their assaults to end in failure, I think. They need to send forward more reinforcements. Joker has plenty of that. Even just basic units of Rhudaur swordsmen would be enough just to stoke the fires for now. Urakai crossbowmen. More Urakai crossbowmen, but not exactly what you want for clearing a wall. If they want to be the ones to move in there, which Roman slavers still back there. Urakai crossbowmen waiting, biding their time. Norman archers, they're pushing forward here, the defenders, which is risky. This is perhaps where I would say they're at their most vulnerable at this point, even with the Carascaladon's Guardians. They've got some support from the Spears of the Wood, but as strong as they are, and as almost ideal a position as this is, they are still going up against another faction who's pretty good in this kind of situation. That's so many Urakai pikemen backed up by enough swordsmen that it's going to be a problem for them. Watchers of the Golden Wood in behind, they actually still have a bit of ammunition. Rhudaur archers making their way across. Perhaps going to go to the aid of the Carascaladon's Guardians just to offer themselves as a bit of a meat shield. One Nazkai remains. He's not actually bloodied, interestingly enough. Surrounded by... I thought for a second, I mean, it's a bug, I suppose. I thought for a second that Lorand Archer was just trying to punch the Nazkai to death. We'll say that that's the case, even though his sword has just gone missing. Urakai pikemen continuing to really, once again, be the heart of the Isengard efforts here. Very difficult to deal with this sort of thing in melee. Where did the shield maidens go? Ah, there they are. Perhaps trying to get into a position where they can shoot down into those pikes. Take away the pikes and things get a little bit dicier, you have to say, given the fact that the attackers don't have tremendous levels of quality. Enough, certainly, but not tremendous. Need to reorganise themselves. They need to be a little bit careful, Isengard. They have the upper hand, but they don't want to start giving Lothlorien a way back into this encounter at the main gate. What is actually back here in the... They have another unit of Westmark infantry that's healthy enough. It's the General's Bodyguard, which is a bit weird. Again, weird choices. No cavalry, which I'm actually glad to see, because sally outs on this map very often end in disaster. As thematic as it is, very often it doesn't work. You cannot charge through pikes as they did in the movie in Medieval 2. It simply will not function. Galathran Blade Masters joining in the defence, two-handed swordsmen that they are. Now, they did pretty well in this sort of situation. The Kindred of Celeborn come back, only 19 of them left, so they don't have too much left to give. But they are going to be needed. They need to perform at their peak. Watchers of the Golden Wood is still here. The Karen Amroth Rangers possibly are out of ammunition, but they still make for kind of like slightly worse versions of the Galathran Blade Masters in melee, I suppose. Which is still a useful unit to have. Another unit of Nazkai from Pajo. That's the thing with having more than one of these armies. If you kill one unit of super high tier infantry, there's every chance that the other one has got exactly the same thing coming your way at some point. Which Roman slavers, so plenty of armour piercing goodness on offer from the attackers. Maybe armour piercing is not quite as useful as it would be against these two foes as it would be against some others. But it'll be enough. The damage surely will be a problem. Watchers of the Golden Wood pulling back. Things seem to have stabilised over here for the defenders, but still victory seems certain for Isengard according to the game. Arrows coming in. That's the thing that will potentially change things around a little bit. Aha. And now they're trying their luck up here again. Another fairly healthy unit of Urakai Infantry. Lorand Archers and a not healthy unit of Westmark Infantry at all. So, again, good timing that from Lord Malleus. Problems. The defenders' problems increase, and at this point, maybe going numbers heavy is not going to be the best thing for them, because they're going to need some quality somewhere. We've still got these units of spears waiting and biding their time. The shield maidens, that one unit of shield maidens at this point could have to be the difference maker for them. All the pressure is going to be on them. Urakai Infantry doing their thing. Defeat is a distinct possibility for the Urakai pikemen. Things turning around now thanks to those arrows finding their marks. Karen Amroth range is actually in a good position. They do still have a bit of ammunition. They've got a very good shot in there as well, so well found by Y2K86. A good opportunity here to start turning things around, if only a little bit. Mark Infantry doing their thing. They've done well against this unit of Urakai Infantry as well. The Lorinard Archers, I mean, there's two units of Lorinard Archers as well as the battered unit of Westmarks that are there. So it wasn't as simple as it first appeared. Shaken those units on the front line now as well. Not able to puncture the defences just yet, but how long can defenders keep this up for? Urakai Infantry waiting. They have enough reinforcements. The Carascaladon's Guardians have really done an immense job over here, but part of that I think is just the fact that the attackers haven't capitalised on what they have over here. They could just try and force their way through essentially. As soon as you get the Nazkai or the Witcher Slavers or both in and amongst those pikemen, while their stats and their second hit point makes them a less appealing prospect in that sort of fight, you're still going to lose if you get Nazkai right up in and amongst them. So using mass would have been the answer there, I think. Watchers of the Golden Wood trying to get involved in melee. I said trying to get involved in melee. They are involved in melee and they're slaughtering Snaga. Picking on the weakest of the attacking units, there's Haldia. And the Rohirric General being committed. I mean, this is dangerous because in a unit like the Westmark Infantry, he's a little bit more vulnerable than he would otherwise be. And the loss of Theoden may prove to be a real issue for the Rohirrim. Many of those Urakai pikemen left now, and another wave is going to be needed. How many waves do the attackers have left in them? As much as I've been saying how long can the defenders keep this sort of thing up for, the same does apply for the attackers. They can't afford to just... they don't have infinite amount of troops, and indeed quite a lot of these are actually ranged units. That's hunting pack, crossbows, marksmen. They've got some Rhudaur swordsmen over here, but even the troll hunters are ultimately a ranged unit. They don't have the luxury of infinite amount of melee units, and with all of these ranged units, at some point they're going to have to start using them to a good effect. They're going to have to start getting those troll hunters a little bit closer to the action, trying to break things up, get some good volleys into the defending infantry that remains, because at this point, while this fight was going quite well for them, with the addition of those arrows, more commitment of what little resources the defenders have left, that has ultimately been enough to break up that pike block and stem the progress that the attackers were making. Over here, meanwhile, Blackwolds have made their way forward, a unit that was hidden up till now. Similar to the Urakai Berserkers, not quite as good, but they will fill the same sort of function. Plenty of pikemen are here. The Carascaladon's Guardians haven't taken that many losses, but and this is an issue. Like, the Blackwolds getting in and amongst them would be enough, I think, at this stage. It's pretty much them against the world. If they have any potential reinforcements, they've got the Rohirric spears up here, which I'd be tempted to send both of these units down at this point just to back up those pikes. It'd probably be enough to keep that defensive position in good shape. Nazkai still there, Urakai Infantry being moved to reinforce. Carascaladon's Guardians taking losses continuously. Rhudaur swordsmen have moved forward now, but is it too little too late over here, you'd have to say? the extremely high melee defense of the Staff Masters proving to be kind of an interesting thing. Be interested to see how many kills they got come the end of this battle. I believe we're seeing this battle from their perspective, or are we? Yes, I think we are seeing the battle from Lothlorien's perspective, so we will be able to see that. Healthy enough unit of Westmark Infantry. Fate still seems almost certain, according to the announcer. I'm less convinced by that, honestly. Ah, here we are. This is exactly what the sort of thing which... It's come a little bit too late, in my opinion. It should have been far quicker than this. Like, they should have noticed that the Karas Galadon's Guardians were struggling, and the Rohirrim Spears should have been committed down here far sooner. I think now it might be a little bit too late. Watchers of the Golden are going to have to get out of here. The Keren Amroth Rangers trying to shoot in. Do they have the angle? Probably not, honestly. So this is the problem. Westmark Spearmen coming down here as well. Better late than never, I suppose, Rohan. He didn't commit his units when the cause was completely lost, so he is at least fulfilling the function of still defending the gate and still the attackers trying to get in there and not succeeding. What's going on here? Ah, this is bad news. A good catch once again by Ord Malius, who's been doing very, very well in this fight so far. Fortunately for him, that was a blank. Well, unfortunately for him, that was a blank shot. The shield mains of Rohan spared that, and now the Watchers of the Goldenwood are going to be in and amongst them, and the Urakai crossmen are going to be torn limb from limb. But it was a worthwhile endeavour, because killing off those shield mains definitely would have been worth the price of a unit of crossbows. Still a few units for Rohan back in the TC. The Rangers still trying to get into place. Do they have any of those Guardians left? Doesn't really look like it. Their helmets do have a tendency of standing out, so their hit points expended, the mass proving to be too much. And now the Rohan Spears will have to pick up the slack on their own, effectively. Only 2 of those Rangers are actually able to shoot from that angle. Shield Maidens killing off some of those routing crossbows. Swordsman not being fully committed. I mean, trying to shoot in through the gap now is Ord Malius with his crossbowman. Definitely worthwhile. I mean, one stray crossbow bolt could end up killing the Rohan general. That would be most unfortunate for them. Shield Maidens. This unit of Riddermark Archers. I mean, Rohan, they still have the ability to reinforce should they need to. Another unit of Black Bolts moving forward. Once again, the tables of the battle turn in that the attackers' best hope now is at the main gate once again. Westmark Infantry still wait. 81 Watchers of the Goldenwood is a real problem, but Nazkai pushing their way through. Westmark Infantry having to move over here to help shore things up. You can't allow the Nazkai to just have their way with your front line at this point, and it is a concern because they're going to butcher their way through Westmark Spearmen. Are we going to start to see the shield mains? They're in place, waiting. What are they going to fire at though? Westmark Infantry moving over to cover the Watchers of the Goldenwood. Another continuous push up here, but do the defenders have enough on this front line now? There's still 15 Kindred of Celeborn left, which at this point in the battle is actually a significant amount. Loranand archers are there. All of these Rohan units could be committed to areas should they be needed. Well, don't know what happened there. The Nazkai damaged, but not defeated. Are Rohan going to commit their general to this fight? Seems like a bit of a lost cause. There's so much armour piercing in here with the Black Wolds and the Nazkai. I mean, this is where the Rohan general is going to perish, but the addition of those Westmark Infantry will at least slow the attackers down just a bit. More pikes. I mean, that's pretty much everything. Urakai crossbows. The Enslaver's the only thing melee-wise that can be committed as reinforcements now, but that is a very significant unit. Loranand archers continue to chunk away at the units that still occupy the lower fortress. Ah, here we are. Now is the time for the throwing axes, and I would agree, it's not maybe the best angle, but the Nazkai and the Blackwolds are worthy targets. A few of the Silverthorn arrows being utilised as well. This could be the last roll of the dice for the defenders, really. If this works, it could carry them to victory. If it doesn't, then they're going to end up overwhelmed. Those Watchers, though. 81 of them. Still don't have ammunition in their ranges yet either. Y2K has shown... I mean, just in general, actually, the defenders have shown really good restraint with their ammunition. Can't really think of too much wrong with what they've done, like the odd volley here and there, but that's very excusable. Rhudaur marksmen trying to interrupt the shield mains, they're going to succeed, but they're also going to perish for their efforts with the Lorien archers on their way over. The shield mains are also going to be stronger than they are in melee anyway. Arrows being launched over the walls. The Rohan reinforcements, what they can commit still from the TC. I say that, some of it is being sent in. Maybe a little bit too conservative for my taste, but Keren Amroth Rangers and Watchers together. The shield mains may be occupied, but the Elven archers are not. And all of a sudden, this front line over here, the Nazkai, the Blackwolds, the Pikes, all being melted, primarily at this point by Lothlorien, but Rohan once again pinning them in place, doing their job very, very nicely. Rhudaur archers starting to shoot at what? Over there? They're shooting at something. Which is enough. It's enough for them to be contributing to the cause. So one unit of Rhudaur swordsmen is still here. Some Baneguard trying to add some damage to the front line, but that reasonably healthy unit of Helmengast being committed over here should be enough to shore things up for now. What are the shield mains doing? Not pursuing them, are they? That is certainly not what they want to be doing. They want to be staying in place and using their throwing axes. Ah, they're over here. Most of the unit are anyway. There's still a lot of Nazkai left alive. The Westmark units doing their thing. It wouldn't be the first time we've seen the Westmark units be the heroes of Rohan. The last battle on Edoras we saw, yes, Dunland rather threw it away, but it was ultimately Westmark spearmen that saw Rohan over the line. A little bit of friendly fire, which might prove to be fairly decisive. We shall have to wait and see. Still Lurtz hunting pack. They're not bad in melee either, the Lurtz hunting pack. So it's still a battle very much in the balance here, as we are going to be entering the final 10,000 frames at any moment. Lorien archers still here. 10 Rhudaur archers remain. Well, there goes Theoden. It was always something of an inevitability. It was actually as a result, I think, of the Reforged javelins. They've been waiting quite a while here, Rhudaur, to utilise this unit effectively, and finally their time has come. Looks like they are now going to... They don't have that much in the way of ammunition, but they also have a pretty dangerous presence in melee with those big clubs, and... I mean, this is a completely open avenue of attack now. It's going to have to be the Watchers of the Golden Wood to move in. There's 3 Karas Galadon's Guardians. Those Westmark units utterly devastated there by the Frodrum. Once again, things turn around somewhat. Having a look at where we stand here in the final phases. The defenders are down by 3%, but based on the compositions, that could still turn. You have to give the edge, obviously, to the attackers when they have the numbers edge going into these situations. Asimor's Trollhounds is pulling back, Urakai Crossbowman. I suppose at this point maybe they're going to try and get up onto the walls. One problem with Helm's Deep is if you do lose the outer of the 2 ring walls, the attackers can then position their own skirmishers on them and start shooting. They've been trying to do that for a little while in this fight, but they actually genuinely have the opportunity to do that now. That, I think, would be a devastating blow for the defenders. I don't think they'd recover from that. They need to try and stop that from happening at all costs. Watchers of the Golden Wood. I mean, the Frodrum Javelins are good in melee, but they are not a match for the Watchers. These are the facts. Force-wise, Snaga. Yeah, and this is a real problem. I've seen this happen before on Helms. The Urakai crossmen are going to try and get into position. I mean, they're going to take... At this point, I don't think the shield maidens have too much of a choice. They need to clear these crossbows off the walls quickly. So you may as well use the ammunition. The Lothlorien archers also are going to deal with them in melee. So this was a quick response. They may not have wanted to use their throwing axes like that, but I think they kind of had to. And now the Lothlorien archers can also block the potential advance of the Etamor's troll hunters as well. Out of ammunition now, but the shield maidens still a useful unit to have in melee as well. Crossbowman. 119 of them. They've got plenty of these crossbows left, which is a little bit strange. How they're going to go about using them, I'm not sure. This could ultimately end up being their undoing. If they have all of these crossbows, but they don't really have the positioning to utilise them effectively, there isn't really a whole lot of point in them being here. That's more strong ones is thinking of moving forward. They're going to have to use their crossbows almost like a makeshift infantry unit at this point, but that is a very dangerous game to play given the quality levels of the units they're facing off against. Haldir dies in the gatehouse, of course. But his unit, the Watchers of the Goldenwood, are the strongest singular unit on the field at this point. Whether they can go through Ferochum Javelins and Witchrealm Enslavers one after the other with minimal Rohirric support. I mean, they've got a little bit of support from Rohan, but is that going to be enough? I don't know. I don't know. We should have to wait and see. Some Rid of Markspearmen, all the units that Rohan still had in the town centre now being emptied. And their presence on the front line will be a sight for sore eyes, I'm sure, because the Lurtz hunting pack are moving forward, the half-orc Bane Guard, this side gate now is being put under consistently more and more pressure. Carrying Amroth Rangers, they still have ammunition, which is incredible really when you think about it. Surely not much more, but just a few volleys at this point could make the difference between victory and defeat. Ridmark Archers moving into place, Shield Maidens and Lornand Archers guarding this approach because they know that if they don't, all of those crossbows and javelins from Rhudaur will be all too happy to help themselves to that bit of high ground. Watchers of the Goldenwood need to be extremely careful here. I mean, this is a moment where maybe he was hoping Rohan would come with him so that the Rohirrim could deal with the Snaga and he could... Well, I guess Rohan have gone with him, but not with enough. I don't know, that the execution on that might prove to be fairly decisive as well. Good opportunity for the crossbows to get some pot shots off as well. That's a unit that I didn't realise was still alive either. They've been hidden for a long time. The Franodine Rangers, they've still got the same problem that the crossbows and the javelins have, in that if you don't get into a good position to use them at range, they don't really serve an extremely useful purpose, but ultimately at this point, with all of these units that are just popping out of thin air, they may just have straight up enough numbers to break what's left of this defence. Helmlingas continue. Karen Amroth Rangers leave. Still the Watchers of the Goldenwood, the heart and soul of this defensive effort. Urakai crossmen pushing their way forwards. Just enormous carpets of bodies around where the two choke points are. Shieldmaidens around. Are they going to come down here? I would really recommend against doing this, but I mean, the Shieldmaidens are pretty good in melee. They're going to kill off what few crossbowmen are here, but ultimately they're a little bit depleted, and I'd back the Etamor's Troll Hunters in a melee fight there, but he's pulling back. Doesn't want to get his javelins that still have a lot of ammunition involved in any melee fight. Karen Amroth Rangers are up here. Things are getting a little bit messy now. Urakai starting to wash through the roads within Helm's Deep, and this is a bad sign. Watchers of the Golden One Karen Amroth Rangers are going to try and defuse the situation. They may be able to kill off a fair amount of crossbowmen, but I don't think they're going to be able to salvage the situation from here, in all honesty. Especially not now that the Witch Realm Enslavers are taking up the mantle of leading this assault. They'll cut their way through the Rohirric units that are here. Urakai crossbows. Just getting one unit of crossbows into a position where they can fire a few volleys at this point would be enough. Remark archers, shield maidens falling back to their defensive shape. Clear projectiles being shot over the walls by the Crowned Rangers. Not terribly effective for rangers, but at this point just getting any kills at all could well be enough. But Mark archers still have ammunition. I mean, they're a very basic unit of archers, but could that be enough? Firing across into the Witch Realm Enslavers. Crossbows struggling in the face of all of these elves. If the defenders do win, it will surely be on the back of having a little bit of extra ammunition and the quality that the elves still possess in melee. Surely that'll be a bridge too far for them. It's closed up to within 1% though, and that is maybe a concern. They just need to get a few volleys. These Watchers of the Goldenwood have taken a lot of losses in a relatively short space of time, intercepting yet another unit of crossbowmen, carving through more of them. It seems to be an inexhaustible supply though. Snaga skirmishers moving forward in high numbers. Witch Realm Enslavers who have taken a bit of damage, but there are still 62 of them, and they now have claimed the mantle of being the most dangerous singular unit on the field by a fairly long way as well, with the damage sustained by the Watchers. Still those Atomor's Troll Hunters. They fought valiantly here, the defenders, but I just don't think they have enough left in the tank. Again, it's a committing forward what units they have left out of desperation to try and do damage where they can. Does it? I would have to concur. Snaga skirmishers finishing off the Watchers of the Goldenwood. Good use of the Snaga skirmishers there by Pajo. Finishing off a unit which has been a thorn in the attacker's side for a long time in this battle. Karen Amroth Rangers, Urakai crossbowman. I think it is merely a last stand for the defenders at this point, but a very valiant effort. Still got those Riddermark archers firing down in, slowly doing damage to the enslavers. Atomor's Troll Hunters, who still haven't really done anything in this fight as such. Westmark Infantry engaging them in melee. They will ultimately lose. Crowned Rangers starting to rip through the Riddermark archers, who weirdly represent the defenders' last hope, the Fool's Hope, but still. Crowned Rangers doing their thing. Crossbows also. Despite perhaps an over-reliance on ranged units here in the late game, it was still enough through sheer numbers. Have anything in the TC? Spears of the Wood. Lothlorien archers, two of them, preventing the TC cap. Not really seeing how there's still this many frames left, to be honest with you, because there doesn't seem to be two Narskai from Pajo, so even his Narskai were ultimately defeated. They overcame a lot of challenges here, the defenders. So close and yet so far. Yeah, 4 or 5% seems about right, given the path that the battle has taken.
Our enemy has command of the castle.
Quite so. Westmark Infantry are routing. And the Shield Maidens are the last non-routing unit that Rohan have here defending, or trying to reclaim the TC. Technically worked as well. The Spears of the Wood return from routing. They too will suffer the same fate, however. Here come the... They will not be routing anymore either, so the Westmark Infantry are back.
Our allies have fled the field like cowards.
I say that, they've fled the mortal plane, perhaps you would say, given that they've died to the last man. Very harsh words from the Elven announcer there. 3 Spears of the Wood remain. And that's going to be that. A very enjoyable siege of Helm's Deep this has been. And that's going to be that.
Our enemies have snatched victory from us like thieves in the night.
Have they? Well, ultimately I think the defenders played very well. I think that maybe composition-wise they could have made a few adjustments. I actually like the fact that Rohan went numbers heavy, though it definitely had its upsides. I just feel as though what was needed was a real showstopper of a unit, something like the Medicell Guard. If you had replaced maybe a unit of Eastmark Spearmen and one of the units of Westmark Infantry, you would have been able to afford a unit of Medicell Guard that would have given you a really strong unit of Javelinmen and a very effective unit of infantry as well, and that could have made the difference ultimately, because those throwing projectiles can be so effective for the Rohirrim. Maybe not enough of those either. Maybe it was a little bit too much of a rank and file army with basic archers and infantry. Make up your own minds on that. I think that it definitely had its upsides. It just needed a little bit more quality folded into it, and it would have worked for Sebastian, I think. Y2K played very well, I think. I mean, lots of kills, as you would expect from the elves in this situation, with all their archers and the damage we saw them do. Ord Malleus, I think, was the standout player for the attackers. Had plenty of neat little ideas, some of which paid off, some of which didn't, but ultimately it's all about the trying of those things and not simply marching to your doom into the welcoming arms of the defenders. And just well played by the attackers as well, I think. I think Rhudaur and Isengard all round did very well. No one really played badly in this fight, which is all you can ask for, I suppose. Having a little look at what did the damage for Y2K, so over 1,000 kills of the Keren Amroth Rangers. Take note of those numbers because they won't be here forever for the Rangers, most certainly. Over 400 kills apiece on the Watchers of the Golden and the Kindred of Caliborn, so he definitely used his high ticket units as well as he could. 339 on Lorinand Archers as well. Over 100 kills apiece on the March Warden, so all of those ranged units really doing the business. Maybe when the lower fortress fell, some of his other units that were down there maybe didn't do quite so well, like 11 kills on Lorinand Axemen is a little bit underwhelming. 501 kills on Karas Galadon's Guardians though, so it's really hard to be critical of the kind of kills that Y2K was chucking out, considering only 800 or so kills behind him was his ally who had a far more basic army. I think both sides of the defence did reasonably well. It's just one of those things. Very difficult when you're outnumbered as the defenders to win for a reason. It can be done, but Helm's Deep while it is a very defensive position, that transitional phase, the lower fortress can often be where things are decided. Maybe not quite so decisive in this battle as it has been in the past, but it was still an area where the attackers were able to do some damage. And yeah, ultimately they used their pikes well too. So big thank you to Y2K86 for sending this battle in. Big thanks to all the players for being a part of it as well. As I've mentioned, we have got kind of an episodic series on the way. Someone sent me 3 battles that are meant to be played in series, so we'll be doing that at some point. We'll probably be getting through the 2 Eclipse 2500 scenarios before that, however. There's still the potential for 4 Silmarillion battles between now and the end of the year as well, but it kind of depends on whether I can get the version of the game right or not. I have to kind of match up the dates because of updates that I've missed. We'll have to wait and see on that one. It may pan out, it may not. But yeah, other than that, potential for Rise of Mordor stuff in the near future as well. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.